Jack Reacher photo featuring Tom Cruise. While we have seen set photos of Tom Cruise as the title character, Jack Reacher, today we have our first official look at the actor in this adaptation of Lee Child's novel One Shot. Take a look at the photo and read on to see what writer-director Christopher McQuarrie had to say about this ex-military policeman. The filmmaker explained that this stoic drifter has very few ties to anyone in modern society. Every hero has a weakness, though, and Jack Reacher's soft spot is that he always has to rectify any wrongdoing he comes across, according to the writer-director. He is an extremely pragmatic, matter-of-fact person. He's very solitary, but he can't walk away from a situation that needs to be made right. His own sense of right and wrong tie into that situation, and he can't leave until it's been resolved. That's his Achilles heel. There has been some controversy over this adaptation, since Jack Reacher is a hulking 6'5" man in the Lee Child novel, and Tom Cruise is only 5'7". The actor recently revealed that the author approved of his casting. For those of you who know the books, I'm obviously not 6'5" like Jack Reacher. But Lee felt that I was the right guy to drive fast cars and kick the ST out of people on screen. A picture is worth 1,000 clues. In the depths of a dimly lit detective agency, buried amidst stacks of old case files, was a picture that shouldn't have existed. Jack Reacher, a drifter with no permanent address, no family, and a past littered with military commendations and bloody fistfights, wasn't the type of man you'd expect to see in a formal photograph. Yet, there it was. On the desk of an aging private investigator, dust-covered and forgotten, lay a photograph of Tom Cruise posing as Jack Reacher. The investigator, Clara Donovan, had inherited her uncle's agency after his sudden passing. Had been a grizzled, old-school type, a man who still used payphones and believed computers were overrated. Clara's initial task was simple: go through his things, close down the office, and maybe donate whatever could be salvaged. But as she sifted through folders and battered notebooks, something caught her eye. The photo. It was an 8x10 glossy, the kind they'd use in Hollywood to promote a movie. It depicted Tom Cruise in full Reacher mode, a leather jacket slung casually over his broad shoulders, a determined squint in his eye, and a backdrop of a gritty, rain-soaked alley. The pose was iconic, his body language exuding confidence, danger, and the kind of readiness Reacher always had. But this wasn't an ordinary promotional photo. Something about it felt wrong. The photo seemed out of place. Why would her uncle, a man with no particular interest in Hollywood, possess such a picture? And why was it shoved in a file marked with nothing more than the word discreet scrawled in his signature-heavy handwriting? Intrigued, Clara decided to dig deeper. She pulled open the drawer labeled R for Reacher and found a thin, almost empty file. Her uncle's notes were brief, but telling. Apparently, he had been hired to track a man who matched the description of Jack Reacher, the real Jack Reacher, not the Hollywood version. The case had started a few years ago when a wealthy but reclusive client believed her life was in danger. She thought Reacher had been tailing her. At first, Clara found it absurd. Jack Reacher? He was a fictional character, a construct from the imagination of Lee Child, brought to life by the likes of Tom Cruise in the movies. But as she continued to read her uncle's notes, she realized this case had been anything but ordinary. The client, one Olivia Vaughn, insisted she'd seen Reacher multiple times. She described him in detail: tall, muscular, sandy-haired, and always watching from the shadows. Vaughn was convinced that this man, whoever he was real, not just some figment from a book or a film. Clara flipped the pages and found more photos, though these weren't professional headshots. They were grainy, distant snapshots of a man who fit Reacher's description. His face was never fully visible, but his silhouette was unmistakable: broad shoulders, hands tucked into pockets, always lurking just out of reach. Her uncle had written, subject cited, fits profile. Possible surveillance, but need to confirm. As Clara mulled over the case, she couldn't help but wonder, what if her uncle had stumbled upon something bigger than a simple stalker? Could it be that someone was living out the life of Jack Reacher, emulating his nomadic, justice-driven existence? Or had her uncle, with his penchant for conspiracy theories, been chasing shadows? She knew the only way to find out more was to track down Olivia Vaughn. Vaughn's house was secluded, a sprawling estate hidden behind tall iron gates and surrounded by dense forest. Clara stood at the intercom, nervous yet determined. After a few tense moments, the gate buzzed open. Olivia Vaughn was older than Clara had expected. She had the air of someone who had seen too much of the world and grown tired of it. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, sized Clara up instantly. "You're not your uncle," she said flatly. "No," Clara replied, "but am finishing his work." Vaughn sighed, motioning for Clara to follow her into the living room. The house was impeccably decorated, yet it had a hollow, empty feel, like a museum filled with artifacts but devoid of life. "I take it you've read his notes," Vaughn said, sitting down with a weariness that betrayed her composed demeanor. "I did." "You believe you were being followed by Jack Reacher?" "Yes." "I know how ridiculous it sounds," Vaughn said, cutting Clara off before she could speak. "But I know what I saw." Clara glanced down at the photo of Tom Cruise as Reacher, still tucked under her arm. "You realize Reacher's a fictional character, right? You've seen the movies? Read the books?" Vaughn leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "I know the difference between fiction and reality, but Reacher is real in some form. There's a man out there living like him. Maybe he's inspired by the stories, or maybe he just happens to fit the description. Either way, he's dangerous." Clara was skeptical, but intrigued. "Did my uncle find anything that confirmed your suspicions?" Vaughn's eyes flickered with something, a brief flash of fear or perhaps regret. "He found more than he bargained for. That's why he stopped." "What do you mean?" "He called me a few days before he—" Vaughn trailed off, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Before he died. He said head made contact." Clara froze. Her uncle had never mentioned anything about this in his notes. "Contact? With the man you thought was Reacher?" Vaughn nodded. "He didn't say much, just that he was sure it was him. The real Reacher, or at least someone who thought they were." Clara's heart raced. If what Vaughn was saying was true, then her uncle's death might not have been the accident she had always believed it to be. "Do you have any proof?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vaughn stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a small, leather-bound notebook. She handed it to Clara. "This belonged to your uncle," she said. "He gave it to me for safekeeping, told me to give it to you if anything happened to him." Clara's hands trembled as she opened the notebook. Inside were more notes, sketches, and names. But one thing stood out, a list of dates and locations, all corresponding to sightings of the man Vaughn believed was Reacher. As she flipped through the pages, something caught her eye, a symbol drawn hastily in the margins. It was the same symbol she had seen carved into the wooden desk back at her uncle's office. "What does this mean?" Clara asked, showing the symbol to Vaughn. "I don't know," Vaughn admitted. "But your uncle thought it was important. He mentioned it was connected to the man." Clara knew she was on the brink of uncovering something much bigger than a simple case of mistaken identity. The symbol, the sightings, and now the strange connection between her uncle's death and this mysterious man, everything pointed to a deeper conspiracy. But one question still nagged at her. Why the photo of Tom Cruise? Why was it in her uncle's file? "Why did my uncle keep this photo?" Clara asked, holding up the picture of Cruise as Reacher. Vaughn stared at the image for a long moment before replying. "Because it's a clue," she said softly. "A clue to where you can find the real Jack Reacher." Clara left Vaughn's estate, the weight of her uncle's case file pressing down on her. She had more questions than answers now, but one thing was clear. Jack Reacher, whoever he really was out there, and she was about to follow in her uncle's footsteps to find him. And if the photo was truly a clue, then the trail was about to get even stranger.